Nobody is coming to save you. Not the government, not your employer, not your family, not luck, not timing, not the economy turning around, not the opportunity you have been waiting for. Nobody is coming. And the sooner you understand that, the sooner you stop waiting for rescue and start building something, the better the rest of your life is going to be. Now, I know that sounds harsh. I know some of you are sitting with that statement and feeling resistance, feeling like that cannot be true. Surely someone, something, some circumstance is going to change the equation for me. And I want to address that resistance directly, because it is the most important thing I am going to say today. The belief that rescue is coming, that some external force is going to arrive and change the trajectory of your life, is the single most expensive belief a person can carry. It costs you time, it costs you energy, it costs you the years you could have spent building while you were waiting. But here is what I also want to tell you. The fact that nobody is coming is not a tragedy. It is the greatest opportunity you have ever been given. But let me ask you this. When did you last feel like something was about to change and then nothing did? Hold that feeling. Because what I am about to tell you is exactly why that keeps happening. And I am going to show you exactly what to do with it. Stay with me. I want to tell you about a conversation I had early in my career. I was sitting across from Earl Shoaff, the man who changed my life more than any other. And I was telling him about my situation, my financial situation, my family situation, the circumstances that I believed were holding me back. I told him about the economy. I told him about the neighborhood I grew up in. I told him about the opportunities I had not been given. I told him about the people who had let me down. And Earl Shoaff listened to all of it. He sat there patiently and listened to every word. And when I finished, he looked at me and said something I will never forget as long as I live. He said, "Jim, are you waiting for someone to come along and change your life? Because I need to tell you, nobody is coming." I did not know what to say. He leaned forward and continued. He said, "The sooner you understand that you are the only person who is going to change your life, the sooner you stop looking outward for rescue and start looking inward for resources, that is the day your life actually begins." That is the day your life actually begins. I drove home that afternoon with those words sitting in the front of my mind. And I made a decision, not a dramatic decision, not a loud one, a quiet, firm, permanent decision. I decided to stop waiting. And what I did next, the specific steps I took in the months that followed, is what I want to share with you today. Because the steps are available to every person in any situation, not just the people who had Earl Shoaff sitting across from them. Every person. But before I give you the first step, I need to ask you something. Now, before the ad interrupted us, I was telling you about the day I decided to stop waiting. And I promised you the specific steps I took. Here is the first one. But before I give it to you, I need to ask you something first. What are you waiting for? Sit with that question. Don't answer it quickly. What are you waiting for specifically? Are you waiting for the right time? The right opportunity? The right economy? The right relationship? The right level of confidence? The right amount of savings in the bank before you begin? Because here is what I know about waiting. Waiting is not passive. Waiting is a choice. And like every choice, it has a cost. Every month you wait for the right time is a month you could have spent getting better at something. A month you could have spent building something. A month you could have spent becoming the person who does not need to wait anymore because they have already done the work. The philosopher Seneca and I have studied the great philosophers because they understood this truth long before any of us, Seneca wrote 2,000 years ago. While we wait for life, life passes. While we wait for life, life passes. 2,000 years ago. And it is as true this morning as it was then. Now let me ask you a different question. When you imagine the life you want, the financial security, the relationships, the freedom, the sense of purpose, when you imagine that life clearly, how did you imagine getting there? Most people, if they are honest, have a vague idea, a general sense of better, someday, somehow, through some combination of hard work and luck and things working out. But not a specific plan, not a specific daily practice. Not a specific set of decisions made consistently over a specific period of time. And this is the first thing I want to address. Because the absence of a specific plan is not a neutral condition. It is a decision. It is a decision to leave your future to chance. And your future is too important to leave to chance. Here's the first thing to do instead of waiting. Write down what you want. Not generally. Not, I want a better life, or I want to be more successful. Specifically, in detail, with numbers, with dates. I want to earn this specific amount by this specific date. I want to be debt-free by this specific month. I want to have this specific experience with my family within this specific time frame. Written down, on paper, in ink, not in your head. Do you know why writing it down matters? Let me ask you this. Have you ever written down a goal and been surprised by how different it looked on paper than it did in your head? Most people have. Because in your head, a goal is comfortable. It is vague enough to avoid the discomfort of specific commitment. But on paper it becomes real. On paper, it requires you to look at it directly. On paper, it asks you the question you have been avoiding. Are you serious about this or not? The act of writing is a declaration of intent. And intent is where all action begins. Earl Shoaff told me, Jim, the reason most people never achieve what they want is not that they don't want it badly enough. It is that they have never made it specific enough to pursue. You cannot pursue a feeling. You can only pursue a clearly defined destination. So here is the cliffhanger. Here is the thing I want you to hold on to as we go forward. Writing down what you want is the first step, but there is a second part of this step that most people skip. And without the second part, the first part is nothing more than a list. I will give you that second part in a moment. But first I need to tell you something about the year I spent doing this wrong. The year was 1961. I had started writing things down. I had goals on paper. I could look at them every morning. I could tell you exactly what I wanted and by when. And nothing was changing. The goals sat on the paper sat on the desk, and my life sat exactly where it had always been. And I went back to Earl Shoaff frustrated. I said, I am doing what you told me. I have written it down. I have been specific. I know what I want. And he said, do you know what it will require? I said, what do you mean? He said, a goal without a price is a wish. What are you willing to pay for what you want? What are you willing to pay for what you want? Not in money, in effort, in time, in comfort sacrificed, in habits changed, in the version of yourself you have to become to earn the thing you say you want. The second part of writing down what you want is writing down what it will cost you. Specifically, in detail, what will you have to stop doing? What will you have to start doing? What will you have to become? And then the hardest question of all, are you willing to pay that price? Because if you are not willing to pay the price, the goal is not a goal. It is a fantasy. And there is nothing wrong with a fantasy, but you should be honest with yourself about which one you are carrying. When I answered Earl Shoaff's question honestly, when I wrote down what my goals would actually require of me, I understood why nothing had been changing. Because I had wanted the result without being willing to pay the price. The moment I agreed to pay the price, everything started to move. And this leads me to the second thing to do instead of waiting. The one that most people find the hardest. Become a student, not a casual reader. Not someone who occasionally picks up a book when they feel like it. A committed, disciplined, daily student of whatever field you are trying to master. Let me ask you this. When is the last time you deliberately learned something new? Not something you accidentally absorbed from the television or overheard in conversation. Something you sat down intentionally to learn. A skill, a discipline, a philosophy, a strategy. For most people, the honest answer is not recently enough. And here is why this matters. Jim Rohn's fundamental belief, one I have carried for my entire adult life, is that your income will rarely exceed your personal development. Say that again. Your income will rarely exceed your personal development, which means if you want more from the world, you have to bring more to the world. If you want a bigger life, you have to become a bigger person. If you want the results to change, you have to change. And you change through learning. Now, I am not talking about years of formal education before you can begin. I am talking about 1 hour a day. 1 hour every day of deliberate, intentional learning in the area where you want to grow. 1 hour a day is approximately 365 hours a year. Do you know what 365 hours of focused learning adds up to over 5 years? It adds up to mastery, not celebrity, not overnight success. Mastery, the kind that compounds, the kind that builds on itself, the kind that eventually produces results that look to outsiders like talent, but are actually just the accumulated evidence of someone who showed up every day and kept learning. But here is the cliffhanger. Here's the thing about becoming a student that most people miss. And it is not the learning itself, it is who you learn from. And I will tell you exactly what I mean by that right after I explain the single biggest mistake I made in my first years of trying to grow. For the first several years of my adult life, I was learning from the wrong people. Not bad people, not dishonest people, good people, people who cared about me, people who meant well, but people who were where I did not want to be. I was taking financial advice from people who were broke. I was taking relationship advice from people whose relationships were struggling. I was taking career advice from people who had never built anything they were proud of. And the advice they gave me was sincere, it was well-intentioned. But it was the advice of people who were exactly where I did not want to go. Let me ask you this. Who are the 5 people you spend the most time with? Not who you wish you spent time with, who you actually spend time with. Whose voices are in your ear most consistently? Whose opinions do you hear most often? Whose example are you absorbing, whether you realize it or not? Because here is what I know about human beings. We become the average of the people we spend the most time with. Not immediately, not dramatically, gradually, over months and years, the way a river slowly reshapes the banks around it. The influence is so gradual you often do not notice it. Until you step back and realize you think like the people around you think. You make decisions like they make decisions. You have the results, they have results. So when you decide to become a student, be deliberate about who you study. Seek out people who have already built what you want to build. Read what they read. Study how they think. Pay attention not just to what they did, but to how they decided. And here is the third thing to do instead of waiting. It is the one most people understand intellectually, but almost no one actually does. Start before you are ready. Let me say that again because I want it to land. Start before you are ready. Now, I know the question you are asking. How do I start before I am ready? What does that mean practically? Let me answer that. Readiness is not a condition that arrives from outside. Readiness is a feeling that comes from action. You do not feel ready and then begin. You begin and then through the doing, you become ready. Think about the first time you drove a car. Were you ready? Were you confident? Did everything feel natural and under control? Of course not. You were nervous. You made mistakes. You overcorrected. You were not ready, but you kept driving. And somewhere in the doing, somewhere in the practice and the repetition and the gradual accumulation of experience, you became ready. It works the same way with everything else in life. The entrepreneur who waits until they are ready to start their business never starts. The writer who waits until they are confident enough to write never writes. The investor who waits until the market feels safe enough to invest never invests. They wait. And while they wait, life passes. Remember Seneca. Now here is the cliffhanger. Here is what I want you to hold. Starting before you are ready does not mean starting without a plan. And the difference between starting without a plan and starting before you are ready, that difference is the difference between recklessness and courage. I will explain exactly what I mean right after I tell you about the morning I started. Something I was absolutely not ready for. It was the early 1960s. I had decided I wanted to speak, not to audiences of thousands that came later. I wanted to speak to small groups about the principles I was learning, the philosophy I was developing, the things I was beginning to understand about why some people's lives work and others do not. I was not ready. I was terrified. I had no credentials. I had no formal training. I had no reputation. I had nothing except a set of ideas that I believed in and a desire to share them. The first time I spoke in front of a group, it was 8 people in a living room. I could feel my hands shaking. My voice was not steady. I lost my place 3 times. But I did it. And something happened in that living room that I did not expect. The people in those 8 chairs leaned forward. They were interested. Not because I was polished, I was far from polished, but because what I was saying was true. And people recognize truth when they hear it, regardless of how imperfectly it is delivered. I walked out of that living room knowing 2 things. First, I was not ready. Second, I was going to keep going anyway. And that decision to keep going when I was not ready, to start before I had permission, to begin before I had credentials. That decision compounded over the following decades into something I could never have imagined in that living room. Now, the difference between starting recklessly and starting courageously, the thing that separates the two is the question you ask before you begin. The reckless person asks, is this going to work? The courageous person asks, what is the worst that can happen if it doesn't? And when you honestly answer the second question, when you look clearly at the actual consequences of failing, you almost always discover that the risk is far smaller than the fear around it. What is the worst that can happen? For most of the things most people are afraid to start, the worst that can happen is embarrassment, inconvenience, the need to try again differently, not ruin, not catastrophe, not the end of everything, embarrassment and inconvenience. And when you understand that when you hold the actual risk clearly rather than the imagined one, the starting becomes possible. Now this brings me to the 4th thing to do instead of waiting. And this one is the one I have returned to more than any other in my own life. Build your discipline before you need it. Let me ask you a question. When do most people try to develop discipline? When they need it. When the crisis arrives. When the deadline is passed. When the consequences are already visible. But discipline built under pressure is not real discipline. It is desperation. And desperation produces inconsistent, fragile results that do not compound. Real discipline, the kind that builds wealth, builds health, builds relationships, builds the life you actually want, is built in advance in the quiet days, in the ordinary mornings, in the routine that nobody sees and nobody applauds. Here is a question I want you to sit with. What is the one daily practice, the one specific habit that you know would change your life if you did it consistently for a year? You already know what it is. I am not going to tell you you know. Maybe it is waking earlier. Maybe it is reading more carefully. Maybe it is managing your finances more deliberately. Maybe it is investing in your relationships with more consistency and attention. You know what it is. The question is not what the practice is. The question is why you are not doing it. And the honest answer for most people is that they are waiting for motivation to arrive before they begin. But here is the truth about motivation. Motivation follows action. It does not precede it. You do not feel motivated and then begin. You begin and then through the doing motivation arrives. The discipline builds the momentum. The momentum produces the motivation. The motivation sustains the discipline. But it starts with action. Before motivation, before you feel like it, before the circumstances are favorable. That is what discipline actually is. Not the ability to do hard things when you feel like it, the ability to do them when you don't. And here is the cliffhanger that I want you to carry into the next part of our conversation. Most people understand discipline intellectually, but there is a specific enemy of discipline, one that most people never name, never address, never defend against, and it quietly destroys more potential than any external obstacle ever could. I am going to name that enemy and tell you exactly how to defeat it. I want to tell you about a man I knew in the late 1960s. Sharp man, hardworking, more disciplined than almost anyone I had met, and completely broke. Not because he was lazy, he was the opposite of lazy, but because every ounce of his discipline was aimed at the wrong things. He was the busiest, unsuccessful person I ever knew. I watched him for almost 2 years. I tried to understand what was happening. And the day I finally understood why his discipline was not producing results was the day I understood the real enemy of discipline. It is not laziness. It is something far more dangerous. The enemy of discipline is not laziness. I know that surprises most people because we are told the reason people don't succeed is laziness. The reason people don't build what they want is that they don't work hard enough. But I have stood in front of millions of working people over the course of my career. And the vast majority of them are not lazy. They are tired. And those are not the same thing. Lazy is a choice. Tired is a consequence. The consequence of working hard in the wrong direction, of putting consistent effort into things that do not compound, of being disciplined in ways that do not serve the life they want. The real enemy of discipline is distraction. Not the big obvious distractions, the small constant ones, the ones that feel productive but are not, the ones that feel urgent but are not important. Let me ask you this. How much of your average day is spent on things that are urgent but not important? The phone call that needed to be returned immediately but did not actually matter. The problem that demanded attention but moved nothing forward. The conversation that consumed an hour and produced nothing of value. Most people spend the majority of their days responding to urgency. And they end each day feeling busy, genuinely, legitimately busy, but not actually closer to anything they care about. Jim Rohn has said this for decades. Don't mistake movement for progress. Don't mistake movement for progress. A rocking horse moves. It never gets anywhere. The fifth thing to do instead of waiting is this. Protect your most important hours. Every person has a few hours in their day, maybe 2, maybe 3, when they are at their sharpest, when their thinking is clearest, when their energy is highest, when they are most capable of the kind of focused, productive work that actually moves the needle. Do you know when those hours are for you? Most people do. And do you know what most people do with those hours? They spend them on the most urgent demands of the day, the emails, the requests, the problems that other people have brought to their door, and they save whatever is left, whatever energy remains after the urgent has been served for the important. But there is nothing left. There is never anything left, because the urgent always expands to fill the time available to it. Here is what I want you to try. Not tomorrow, today. Identify your sharpest 2 hours, the time of day when you are most capable. And for the next 30 days, protect those 2 hours, guard them, say no to everything else during those 2 hours. No phone, no requests, no urgency. Use those 2 hours for one thing only, the most important thing you are trying to build. Just 2 hours. Every day for 30 days. Do you know what that adds up to? 60 hours of focused, protected, uninterrupted work on the most important thing in your life. 60 hours. Most people do not give the most important thing in their life 60 hours in a year. You can give it 60 hours in a month. And the results of 60 hours of protected, focused effort on the right thing over 30 days will be more than most people produce in years of busy movement. But here is the cliffhanger. Here is what I need you to understand about those 2 hours. It is not enough to protect them. You have to fill them with the right kind of work. And most people, even the ones who protect the time, fill it with the wrong kind. I will show you exactly what the right kind is. Right after I tell you what happened when I finally started protecting my mornings. When I was building my speaking career, this was the mid-1960 seconds, I started protecting my mornings. Not the whole morning, 2 hours, before anything else, before the phone, before the demands of the day, before anyone else's priorities had a chance to replace my own. I used those 2 hours for 2 things. The first was reading. Not novels, not newspapers, philosophy, biography, the lives and thinking of people who had built something extraordinary, people who understood how the world worked and had written it down for anyone willing to sit with it. The second was writing. Not correspondence, not administrative work, writing my own thoughts, working through what I was learning, translating the ideas I was absorbing into language I could use with other people. Those 2 hours done consistently over years became the entire foundation of what I eventually built. Every speech I ever gave came from those morning hours. Every book, every principle, every idea that found its way into the lives of millions of people began as a quiet thought written in a notebook during 2 hours that I protected before the rest of the world woke up. And the investment required to do that? Going to bed earlier, getting up earlier, saying no to evening activities that kept me up too late to protect the morning. That was the price. And it was the most valuable price I ever paid. Now let me bring everything together, because I want to leave you with something specific, something you can carry out of this conversation and act on today. Let me ask you one more question before I summarize. If your life looked exactly the same 5 years from now as it does today, same income, same habits, same relationships, same daily routine. How would you feel about that? Take a moment, be honest. If the answer is anything other than completely satisfied, then something has to change. And the change does not begin with circumstances. It does not begin with luck. It does not begin with someone arriving to rescue you. It begins with you today, with a decision. Let me leave you with 5 decisions, not 5 tips, not 5 suggestions, 5 decisions that every person watching this, regardless of their age, their circumstances, their history, is capable of making before today is over. The first decision, write down what you want, specifically, with numbers and dates, and then write down what it will cost you, and then decide honestly whether you are willing to pay that price. The second decision, become a student every day. 1 hour of deliberate learning in the area where you want to grow. And be deliberate about who you learn from. Seek the people who have what you want and study how they think. The third decision, start before you are ready. Ask not whether it will work, but what is the worst that can happen if it doesn't? And when the honest answer is embarrassment and inconvenience, begin. The fourth decision, build your discipline before you need it. In the quiet days, in the ordinary mornings, not under pressure, not in the crisis. Now, while the stakes are low enough to practice. The fifth decision, protect your most important hours. Identify them, guard them, fill them with the most important work. And do this for 30 days and measure what it produces. 5 things, specific, practical, available to every person in any situation. Not magic, not luck, not waiting for rescue, work, learning, starting, discipline, protected time. That is the answer. I want to close with this. In 40 plus years of speaking to people who wanted more from their lives, in rooms of 8 people and rooms of 8,000, I have never once met a person who changed their life by waiting. Not one. Every person I have ever met who built something worth having, built it by deciding, by beginning, by showing up when they did not feel like it, by protecting the hours when everything else competed for them, by learning when it was uncomfortable, by continuing when it was discouraging. Every single one of them. And the common thread, the thing they all shared, was not talent, not timing, not advantage. It was the understanding, arrived at in some specific moment in their specific life, that nobody was coming to save them. And that was not a tragedy, that was the beginning. Nobody is coming. Which means everything that gets built from here gets built by you. And that is exactly enough. Go build it. Thank you.